Welcome to it, everybody. I love Tuesdays because it's a chance to get a little bit smarter. It's because we're joined by a couple of great meteorologists here. I'm Chief Meteorologist Louis Turner out of First Coast News in Jacksonville, Florida, joined by James Gregorio in Tampa Bay, and of course, Dr. Rick Knabb with the Weather Channel. And of course, we will get into the tropics, absolutely. In fact, my big banner graphic right now is just purely a number 19, which is 19 days left. We can do it. We can get to November 30th and get through the end of this hurricane season. But it's tough to ignore, Dr. Knabb, but before we jump into the tropics, around the southeast, here in North Florida, all the way down to Tampa, we've had some record cold. So I know you've got some interesting numbers of what we've seen from Charleston down to Daytona and beyond. So how are things looking there, Dr. Knabb?
Well, it's been a record cold day, not just the low temperatures this morning in the southeast down into Florida, but the record cold high temperatures. We'll show you some of the numbers here. This morning, we shattered a record in Montgomery, Alabama, and Tampa, a record cold of 38. Jacksonville absolutely shattering their record cold, but that's just the low temperatures. And so when you start off that cold, it's kind of hard to warm up. And we've had record cold high temperatures today in Daytona, only getting up to the mid 50s, whereas the coldest it's ever been for a high temperature on this date is 60. And a lot of these records go back 80, 100, 110 years. So these are daily records, but very remarkable. So what's going on in the atmosphere is a very early season dip in the jet stream and tremendous cold advection straight from Canada last night. And then the high moved overhead here over the southeast, calmed the winds down, allowed the skies to clear and calm air, allowed the temperatures to just plummet. So the wind chills weren't too bad. And guys, you can also see the speckling over the water of the Gulf and the Southwest Atlantic. That's when really cold air goes over what is still relatively warm waters, you get that unstable look in the low clouds. But the front has cleared into Honduras and into eastern Cuba and Jamaica. So the cold front is where Hurricane Melissa was a couple weeks ago. So wow, what a change. But there's still a lot of convection here in the Western Caribbean where the waters are warm. Now, we don't see anything in the models in terms of development in the near term, but this is a short-term cold snap. And we still have a few weeks where the Western Caribbean can churn out systems. But even if we don't get a tropical system, one concern is all of the thunderstorm activity that will probably persist on again and off again for the next week to 2 weeks. That could hinder the recovery in places like Jamaica and eastern Cuba. But you can tell how the frontal passages off the southeast coast have begun to cool the water temperatures in the Gulf, but it's still very warm down in the Western Caribbean. But guys, isn't it amazing that 3 years ago yesterday, we were talking about a landfalling hurricane, Nicole, on the east coast of Florida on November 10th. So there's a lot of things that can be different from one November to the next. And I also want to remind everybody that I'm not saying this is going to happen this year, but we have had hurricanes make landfall in Florida in late November before, including Kate in 1985 that went into the eastern Florida panhandle. Let's hope we don't have to deal with that. So 3% of the hurricane season left to go in terms of overall activities, Lou. So I know we're all marking X's on our calendar the closer we get.
Absolutely, and Dr. Knabb, you mentioned Nicole, and I get somewhat flashbacks to that as I had been at that point in my career assigned out to the field and was in St. Augustine for that system coming through, and it was interesting because I remember, pumpkins, it floating down. Like, so the folks who'd still had their pumpkins out or had been put in the trash after Halloween, pumpkins floating down the Avenida Menendez, which is right along the bayfront of St. Augustine. St. Augustine had some incredible flooding from Ian and then Nicole. That was one of those banner hurricane seasons with something happening in November. Quite cool. So let's go check in with James out of Tampa now. And I know you had mentioned off camera Uggs weather this morning down there. What's it like down there?
Yeah, it was chilly this morning and chilly throughout most of the day. High temperatures today never broke 60 degrees. So to Dr. Knabb's point, it wasn't just the overnight low, which, by the way, snapped a 133-year record. That went all the way back to 1892. So that record, substantial and over 100-year-old record we snapped this morning. And didn't just tie it, didn't break it by a degree, broke it by 2 degrees. So a pretty significant downward drop. Dr. Knabb laid it all out here. Good radiational cooling night we had as the winds dropped out. That high kind of slid in place. Had the wind stayed up a little bit more, had they been a little more vigorous, we probably wouldn't have seen those records fall like we did, but we really kind of had that perfect setup with that, cold air just plunging all the way down from Canada, that Canadian cold air, super dry. Dew points were like 20, and of course that area of high pressure, keeping the winds at bay. So that trifecta really allowed that cold air to just continue to plummet in here. And highs today, like I said, we haven't even hit 60. So yeah, the Uggs, maybe I'd still be wearing them if I didn't have to actually go to work.
Absolutely. Well, you just frame up the chroma key shot.
Yeah, exactly.
A plus. Just make friends with the director.
Just don't shoot my feet.
That's exactly right. So kind of coming back, towards the hurricane season as a whole, and the bigger picture from the National Hurricane Center now. If we take the hurricane season 1 7-day bite at a time, I mentioned 19 days left. The Hurricane Center, no tropical formation anticipated at least over the next 7 days. So that gets us to the 18th. And then if we look at bigger picture, the global tropics hazards potential. Now you look down towards Honduras, and where that front has now cleared, which Dr. Knabb showed us a moment ago, lot of convective activity there. Nonetheless, we go all the way out to November 25th, and even the global tropic hazard outlook has us at no real potential for development. So Dr. Knabb, despite, in a map you were showing us tons of convective energy there in a very warm still Caribbean, what prevents or what would prevent development now? Why would we be seeing no real areas kind of triggering anything right now?
Well, one thing that's happening is that front. I mean, that front coming down all the way to the south here, that definitely changes the atmosphere. I mean, the front is over warm sea surface temperatures, but it is all the way down into here. So the air mass behind that front certainly is more stable, and it's not as ideal of a set of conditions for development, at least in the near term. Also, the potency of the tropical waves coming from Africa, moving westward, a little less defined than they were. But one thing we got to keep in mind, though, is the Climate Prediction Center, when they put out those couple weeks in advance, global tropical weather hazards outlooks, it's percentages. And so they're not saying the chances are zero. They're just not at least 20% for them to highlight a particular area. But I would not say that the chances are zero that we get development down there, because this is going to be a convectively active area. And CPC did highlight the Western Caribbean as being an above average kind of area of precipitation over the next couple of weeks. So it's not like it's completely unfavorable down there. And I would not be shocked if we got a short-lived system in the very least. And there have been many late Novembers in past hurricane seasons when you have something that forms way down in the southwestern Caribbean that can affect Costa Rica or Nicaragua or Honduras, even if it never comes very far to the north. So, the waters are still really warm down there. And once this big trough goes away, then you won't have the effects of the front. You won't have the bit of wind shear that has made it down into this zone. But one thing I'll say, though, is every day that goes by, with 1985's Kate being a notable exception, the chances of U.S. landfall keep going down. In fact, we haven't had anything make landfall in Texas after this date in history. Florida would be, the one location we'd have to, keep our eye on. But the chances are going down. They're just not quite zero yet, guys.
That's good news, no doubt.
Not quite time to put a time of death on the hurricane season of 2025, certainly. And I think back to just last year, if it was Rafael, I believe, that got to almost major status. there late in the season, but then hit the Gulf and just kind of fell apart. So, James, as you think about those Gulf sea surface temperatures, all this cold, cool air making its way over, what are your take on impacts for, the Gulf side of things?
Well, at least our part of the Gulf here, it would take something fairly strong. Gulf temperatures now down into the lower 70s. So, depending on where any tropical activity should form, does it hold up? Cold fronts are more numerous and stronger here coming across the U.S. and like we just saw. So, again, I think the environment is less conducive. It's more hostile. So getting a landfalling hurricane, the days are numbered. So again, a lot of the elements, a lot of the key components just are not nearly as favorable as they were a month ago, 2 months ago, and the like here. As Dr. Knabb had pointed out, the waves coming off even Africa or any other formation zone are just not as robust and just kind of not there. As a kind of survivor forecaster, what you will, of Sandy, having said that, Superstorm Sandy was just, late October, early November. And then we had on the backside a week later, we had snow in New Jersey, accumulating snow when people didn't have power. So very cognizant and aware of that hybrid type and that transitioning type system as well. So not usually something we see here in Florida, but I guess the point is never say never, right, guys?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, no, you can't. That's why we're going to continue to do this, keep people aware all the way. And here around Florida, we know, you watch and you count down till the 30th. And so, therefore, not the time to do a post-mortem on the 2025 hurricane season yet. But looking back at what we've seen so far this system, we made it as far as named storms so far. And as Dr. Knabb alluded to, not out of the realm of possibility to see a Nestor here before the season's over, but made it all the way through to Melissa. All right, we've had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hurricanes, 4 of those, of course, major, 3 of those Category 5s. And I think as we look back on the season of 2025, Melissa is going to be the main chapter of that novel. And then maybe, chapter 2 or 3, you get down through it, is that the United States did avoid at least hurricane landfall. We had a tropical system earlier in the season impacting the Outer Banks, but overall no landfalling storms here. So Dr. Knabb, getting your takeaway of the season that we have seen so far, as far as kind of beginning of the season forecasting, kind of lining right up with what Hurricane Center put out. What were your takeaways?
Well, every season is different. And we always say at the beginning of every hurricane season, it's not about how busy it will be, it's about how bad it will be. And this year, with that mid-season lull, there was a lot of talk in the middle of the season about how not busy it was, right? Between Fernand and Gabrielle, right. That big gap in activity. And that was an historic lull in activity for the early to middle part of September. But I was always concerned that a mid-season lull, and we had kind of one last year too, just means we have untapped energy to fuel what is to come later. And the hurricane seasons are getting later and later, meaning that a lot of our major hurricanes have been after mid-September in the last decade. And this year just adds to that statistic in a big, big way, with the numerous major hurricanes and Category 5s happening after mid-September once again. And with regard to the continental U.S., again, it was definitely busy enough of a hurricane season, but it was not as bad as it could have been for the continental U.S. just because of what the tracks were, with all of these late season systems curving east of the continental U.S. But it was still obviously bad for the Caribbean, and it was bad on the east coast of the U.S. with all that beach erosion, all of those systems that were remote and pounding the east coast of the U.S. with the high surf. And so one thing that does is it makes us more vulnerable to storm surge and waves next hurricane season, where we might not be so lucky. So every season is different. It's always about how bad it is where you live, not as much about how busy it is. But the number of Cat 5s this year is notable, especially when it followed that mid-season lull. So you just can never count the hurricane season out, and it definitely was a late bloomer this year.
Yeah, for sure. So, James, I asked Dr. Knabb, I'll ask you now, what's as we look back on the hurricane season of 2025, what are your big memories? What are the big takeaways from this one?
I think, two really obviously noteworthy, Aaron and, of course, Melissa. Dr. Knabb brought up a really good point, as to really why we're seeing the uptick in major hurricanes after mid-September into October. Is it because there was that lull? Is it because those, waters have not been upwelled, that they're just boiling over, a lot of fuel for the fire? I don't know the answer to that, but it is certainly interesting to see the increase, the uptick in Category 3, 4, and 5 hurricanes after mid-September into October here. Of course, the peak of the hurricane season right around September 15th, but that still doesn't mean that, that may be the peak of the season, may not be the peak intensity portion of the hurricanes that we may or may not see. So really good point, I think, Aaron, and of course, Melissa. I mean, you're talking about wind gusts with Melissa that were over 185 miles an hour. So not only a Category 5, but one of the stronger hurricanes we have certainly seen as well. So Dr. Knabb, I'm just curious to pick your brain, why you think that we're seeing that uptick in major hurricanes later in the season as compared to, now I get it, not so much in June, but why are we not seeing major hurricanes as much in, maybe early or mid-August as compared to late September or October?
Well, I think one of the main reasons is in the last decade, we've had these perpetually warmer than average sea surface temperatures throughout the Atlantic basin. And one thing that not everybody realizes is the tropical atmosphere, especially in the main development region, the tropical Atlantic and then through the Caribbean, it gets more and more unstable as we get into late September and into October. It's just that sometimes the wind shear can kind of counteract that and lessen the activity, but Melissa showed all you need is a window of opportunity to take advantage of the maximum sea surface temperatures and the maximum instability that is in October. And again, we've had more hurricanes make landfall in Florida in the month of October than any other month of the hurricane season. So but the sea surface temperatures are way warmer than average, and that seems to be a perpetual problem in the Atlantic basin. And you add to that this year, for the second year in a row, a notable mid-season lull, and that's the thing that we don't have the answers for. We really don't. I mean, it's going to be some doctoral dissertations written about these last two mid-season lulls. I don't know if that's going to continue. Nobody knows that, but at some point we're going to start having 3s, 4s, and 5s in early September and late August again. But the mid-season lulls are a big mystery, and it's only easy to talk about why they happened after the fact. Predicting them ahead of time is difficult. But there was some untapped energy that Melissa utilized.
For sure.
It's been an interesting season for sure. And, I thinking internally, of course, Aaron and Melissa, we'll get the Hurricane Center's kind of big final report maybe in a year's time. But ultimately, probably the strongest to ever make landfall in the Atlantic basin. And also the death toll continues to climb. We're getting late numbers from Jamaica even today, and it just tragic. And then I go back to a storm like Imelda, which was such an interesting forecast to watch as it kind of went right up the east coast of Florida. So an interesting year for sure. It's the first time really since 2015 that we haven't had a landfalling system so far here in the United States. Now, I was looking back 75 years, and while we have kind of recency memory bias sometimes, thinking, oh my gosh, 10 years, that's so incredible. But if you go back 75 years, there are these 4 to 5 year cycles that we kind of note that maybe the U.S. does avoid any sort of hurricane landfall. So Dr. Knabb, thank you again for your time, and Jimmy G, James, Gregorio out of Tampa. Man, listen, it was awesome to get to speak with you. Hopefully we get to do this again very soon, and hopefully this season continues to stay quiet, and all we have to really concern ourselves with is falling iguanas and wearing our Uggs to work and staying warm here over the next couple of days.
I much prefer flip-flops to Uggs, but if I have to break out the Uggs, so be it, right?
Absolutely. Dr. Knabb and James, thank you guys so very much. We'll catch up again on Tuesday. In the meantime, you guys have a fantastic rest of your Tuesday and Veterans Day.
Hey, so we're talking about the tropics there with the doctor and Lewis Turner and James there. And let's talk about the cold air that is in the forecast for the first coast, including Jacksonville and really the entire southeast. In fact, this morning we got down to record lows all up and down the eastern seaboard. I want to start off with a broader picture. Look at like Green Bay, Burlington, Pittsburgh. This is their midday high temperatures into the 30s. We've seen some lake effect snow over a foot in spots there across parts of the Midwest. Oof. And this is just a kind of sign of where all this cold air is coming from. But here on our Tuesday morning in Jacksonville, a record low, beating out the record back in 1933. We got down to 28 degrees here for November 11th. Now, that's specifically for November 11th, not the overall record low, but it is the earliest freeze on record since the 70s. So it's been a minute. In fact, take a look at this. So we had clear skies overnight, temperatures, radiation, cooling, cooled down, and it went down pretty swiftly. In fact, just by about midnight, already into the 30s. I saw that on my thermometer, down to 28 just right at sunrise here this morning. And then things rebounded, but not by a lot. So the problem is, if we're not rebounding much, we're only staying into the 50s. We still got clear skies. The winds are getting lighter. These are all signs that tonight is going to be another chilly night on the first coast. Frost and freeze warnings are in place for a good portion of our area. It's going to be absolutely frigid. Now, to know the difference between a freeze and a hard freeze, basically protect your plants, pets, people, temperatures below 32 degrees. I think some areas inland are going to see a freeze, not so much a hard freeze. So I'm not so worried about pipes, unless, there could be some areas well towards our north into Georgia that could see that. Near the coast, I'm not worried about a freeze either. It's going to be more than likely a frost. Now, why is a frost more likely tonight than last night? Well, the big thing is that there is less wind. And you might think, well, I thought wind made it feel colder. Well, yes, the wind chills do, and you get kind of that bubble of warm air, and it blows that off of you, and it feels colder, but frost forms. And the favorable conditions for frost is clear skies and light wind with moisture in the air and temperatures into the 30s. Because if it's too windy, it causes mixing and the molecules can't settle on the surface. So when you have those light winds, they settle as we reach that condensation point right near the ground. There's going to be that frost. So this morning, a lot of you woke up with no frost. Tonight, heading into Wednesday morning across the first coast, but especially for inland areas, you're probably going to see that little glistening on the grass just at sunrise. It'll start to settle. Look at our morning glows. Now, this is going to be for right at the beach. You should be modified enough It's still going to be a cold start to the day, but probably not going to see the frost for Mayport, St. Augustine, Palm Coast. But for sure, once you get west of I-95 and you get north of I-10 especially,